We'll be animating the other two parts of our infographic in this tutorial. We'll be doing the animations for our versus circle, as well as the circles representing our data. Our versus circle drops in with a hard bounce when we make a new coffee selection, and our data circles do a sort of less severe drop in when they first appear on the page. So let's get started writing each of these animations. We'll head over to our CSS in Coda, back to our little block of animations that we've set up, and we'll start writing some new keyframes for these two animations. Let's start with the versus circle first. So we'll start our keyframe block, and I'm going to call this one bounce in because that's very much what it's about to do. What we want to have happen is we want our versus circle to drop in from pretty far above. We want it to fall to some position past its intended position, then bounce up just a little bit, and then fall down just a bit to its final intended position. We'll start with our 0% keyframe, and we're going to have this start very high, so we'll add a transform that translates our versus circle up pretty high, and I'm going to go with minus 500 pixels. And this is going to be a negative number because we're moving upwards, and that has to be a negative value on our y-axis. And then for its first drop, maybe we'll pick 70%. We'll set another transform and have this fall past its intended position, so we'll say 30 pixels. That'll be a bit further than it's really going to end up. And then at 80%, because these bounces are getting smaller, we'll add a transform. That translates our versus circle just up about 10 pixels. So it'll be a small bounce up. And then finally, at 100%, we'll add a transform that translates our versus circle to 0, which is essentially the exact position it already has styles for. So those keyframes will create our bounce effect, but I want to add just a little extra touch to this effect. So I'm going to add just a bit more space here, and I'm going to add a property to a few of our keyframes, starting with our 0% keyframe. Now a bounce in is pretty nice, but personally I prefer it when a bounce in also is accompanied with a slight change in opacity. So I'm going to start our versus circle being transparent and set our opacity to 0. So at the start of its bounce in, when it's making its longest fall, it will actually be transparent at the beginning. And then down here at 80%, I'm going to set the opacity to 1. And that will have it be completely opaque. So in between 0% and 80% keyframe, our versus circle will both be changing its opacity and its position. So we'll have a nice fade in while we're doing our bounce in. And it makes for a nice touch to that effect. We have one last animation we need to write, and that's the drop-in animation for our circles. So we'll start a new keyframes block, and I'm going to call this animation drop in, because that's what they're doing. Now for this drop in, we want a movement that's less severe than our bounce in, and really we just want our circles to start a little higher up than their final position, and just have one movement down. There's no bouncing involved. So because we only need 2 positions, we can use the keywords of from and to define our keyframes. In our from keyframe, I'll set a transform that'll translate our data circles up just a tiny bit, probably about 30 pixels up from their intended position. And in our to keyframe, I'll do another transform that will translate our circles to 0, so back to their original position. Just like our bounce in animation, I'd like to add a little opacity to this one as well. So in our from keyframe, I'm going to add one more property and set our opacity here to 0. And I'm going to do the same in our to keyframe as well, and we'll set the opacity to 1. So this way, while our data circles are doing that slight drop in, they'll also do a fade in from being completely transparent to being completely opaque. So now with both sets of keyframes in place, let's go to assigning our animations. We'll be assigning our versus animation via JavaScript, because we want to have it play each time a selection is made from our menu. So instead of adding the animation properties directly to our versus class, we're actually going to create a new class that we can append or remove with JavaScript later. And we'll do this right up here in our animation section just to keep things all in one place. So I'm going to create a class called bounce in, conveniently named the same as my animation. That's not required, but I like to do it that way. And in this class, we're going to assign our animation properties. Of course, we're going to assign it the name of bounce in. We'll have a duration of 0.5 seconds, because it's going to happen pretty quickly. Our animation timing function will be ease in, and we're going to have this repeat once, and we'll add a fill mode of both. Our data circles animation will also replay each time a new selection is made, but since these HTML elements actually get removed and then re-added to the page each time a selection is made, we won't need JavaScript to trigger their playing a second time. So we can add the animation properties directly to our data circles. And these all happen to be list items within our profile class. So we'll just scroll up here to find them. And here they are. So we can add our animation properties here. We'll assign the animation of drop in. We'll add an animation duration of 0.25 seconds, which is pretty fast, but they're very small and they don't have far to go. We'll have an animation timing function of ease out. And I'm going to set an animation delay of 0.5 seconds. Now you might have noticed that's the exact same amount of time as our versus circle duration was. So I'm going to have this animation start for all the data circles roughly right after the versus circle has ended. This timing might not be exact, but it's going to be pretty close. Then we'll set these to repeat once and have a fill mode of both. With all that set, we can save our file and head over to our browser to preview what we've done. Now if we refresh, nothing's going to happen to our versus circle because we need to add our JavaScript before that animation will be triggered at all. But if we scroll down and refresh, we can see that our data circles have their animation in place. So that's some good progress for this tutorial, and in the next tutorial we'll add some of that JavaScript interactivity.